I'm live again. I'm coming to the end of Time Out of Mind. It's the autobiography of Joan Marshall Grant. She was a writer of her far memories, and she passed away in 1989. I have been reading about how she got to be a writer of her previous incarnations. This is one of the reasons why she wrote this book, which was published in 1956. We are here in chapter 6 of the last part 5, and it's entitled Winged Pharaoh. Early in June, we went to London for a wedding at which Gillian was to be bridesmaid and Leslie best man. While he was at the bridegroom's stag party, I dined with Guy McCaw, whom I happened to run into at Prince's Tennis Club. I had not seen Guy for some time. "What on earth are you doing buried up in Scotland?" he demanded. "You can't even shoot grouse in the winter, or have you become addicted to salmon fishing?" Mildly annoyed that he thought no one could enjoy Scotland unless they were killing something, I forgot I had promised Leslie to be discreet. "I catch an occasional trout when I'm not too busy, but I spend most of my time remembering who I used to be when I lived in Egypt during the First Dynasty." "Good God, Joan, have you gone off your head?" He scrutinized me and seemed relieved that I laughed at him. "You gave me quite a shock. I didn't realize you were joking." "I'm not joking. I have dictated about 60,000 words of what, even if you think I made it up, is an interesting story." "Well, let me read it. At least I will do so if it is typed. But I'm not going to wade through pages of your handwriting. I always tell people the truth, however unpalatable. So if it's a nonsense, I shall be brutally candid. Until then, I had no intention of showing Guy or anyone else the copy I had brought down to give Daisy. But his bland assumption that it would be nonsense, an imaginative outpouring of which I could be cured by a cold douche of criticism, made me send the typescript round to him the following morning. I enclosed a brief note asking him to send it on to me at Hartwood, when I should be with Gillian for 4 days before returning to Scotland. Although she refused to admit it, Daisy was obviously weaker and now had to have a live-in nurse in the house. I was so worried about her that I forgot about the typescript until the morning we were leaving. Instead of a parcel from Guy, there was only a letter. "To my great surprise, you have written something far better than you apparently recognize. I consider it should be published, and have therefore given it to Arthur Barker." "How sensible of him," said Daisy, "although a little high-handed not to consult you first." "But it's bound to cause trouble. What makes it even more awkward is that Arthur is a friend of ours. He and his wife have been down to Seacourt, and Leslie plays tennis with him at Prince's. Leslie doesn't mind you and Alfie, of course, and Gwen knowing how I write. But with nearly everyone else, the subject is taboo, even people like Diana and Christine. If Arthur publishes it, the way I wrote the book is bound to get about, and then Leslie will be furious. Darling, don't anticipate trouble. What you have written has helped me a great deal. It may help other people if they have a chance to read it. Shall I tell Leslie that it has gone to the publishers?" She thought for a moment, and then she said, "It would perhaps be better not to mention it until you hear Arthur's opinion." I was relieved, for it meant that I would not have to tell him if it was rejected. A week later, I received a telegram. "Essential you complete manuscript in 6 weeks so that we can publish in October. Blurb will state most exciting and important book we have ever published. Congratulations, Arthur." The Grant family, including Elsie and Ronald, were coming to Muckarach for August and September, so with Vera and the 2 dogs we migrated to Hartwood. Although Alfie still clung to the hope that Daisy was suffering only a temporary setback, the rest of us knew that it would be her last summer. The cancer had spread to her spine and her lungs, yet she talked about a book as though it was the first of many she would read while I wrote them. I knew that the only way I could help her was to pretend that it was still important to me. It was she who thought of the title, Winged Pharaoh, and when I showed the dictations to her, she said, "Bless you, darling, but only put my initials." From the many patterns of binding cloth which Arthur produced, she chose the nearest one to the faience blue of the scarab. Leslie found a copy of one of the few surviving First Dynasty steles, and on it Ralph Levers, who had worked for several years on the dig at Tel El Amarna, based his design for the dust cup jacket. There were still gaps in the context which had to be filled in before the typescript could go to the printers, and we were within 9 weeks of publication date. By now I could almost always tune in the scene I wanted, but sometimes what I thought would be only a paragraph led to an episode, which could only be included if we made further cuts so as to keep the book to the length laid down by Arthur. Vera produced prodigies of typing, for the meticulous neatness which I had acquired while working for father was so deeply ingrained that every page which had even a comma altered had to be retyped, and a deleted paragraph or an additional sentence entailed doing the whole episode over again. I sympathized deeply with Vera, who was unfailingly cheerful, for I had once sat up all night to retype an article in which on every page I had misspelled by one letter the name of the same species of mosquito. Yet I still considered it unthinkable, as father did, to let a text go to the printer with incorrections. Like most inexperienced authors, when the publisher's blue pencil descended and in a moment removed what it had taken me a great deal of trouble to write, I felt as though he were cutting off my baby's feet to make it fit into the pram. Usually I was too well aware of my amateur status to argue, but I did protest mildly when the penultimate part of the original 9 was excised bodily. Must it all go, even to the death of Sakita's lion? Yes, said Arthur briskly, 120,000 words are more than enough, and yet you have too many deaths in the book already. Batches of galleys were arriving every third day, and once a week I took them up to London to make final proof corrections, with the invaluable help of Eric Partridge. We had done nearly 2/3 of them when Arthur took me to lunch with Charlie Evans of Heinemann, who had read the typescript. He was exceedingly kind about it, and then asked Arthur how many copies he intended to publish. 1,000, said Arthur, at 10 6. I know it's a high price, but it's a long book, and she has been fussy about production. Take my advice and print 500, said Charlie Evans. I like the book very much myself, and would be glad to have it on my list, but you will never sell it. I think I will, said Arthur. Nonsense, my dear boy. I've had far more experience of the publishing trade than any of your firm have got. A first novel, mostly in iambics, about an unknown pharaoh in a virtually unknown period of history, has no chance whatever of making any money. The most you can hope for is a small succès d'estime. Just to prove that I don't agree with you, I shall print 2,000, said Arthur defiantly, which made me feel even more indebted to him. He had given me £25 advance royalty, and now he was going to lose hundreds. The least I could do was to buy the unsold copies myself and hide them in the barn at Mukarach until they became useful bedding for rats. If I ordered them from booksellers all over the country, it might even conceal the fact that he had made a fool of himself and me by backing a flop. As Arthur was not going back to the office, he asked me to drop him at his home in Chessington, which was on my way to Hurtwood. We collected Leslie from Prince's, where he had been playing tennis, and then went to Bulford Street, where I had arranged to pick up Vera. The house was dusty and airless, for it had been empty since the tenants departed 2 months ago. Leslie was prowling about, noticing marks on the paint and how much worse the Queen Anne bureau looked than was indicated by the cursory ink stain on desk entry in the inventory, when I suddenly felt an unmistakable intimation that there was something to dictate. "No," Arthur protested. "The book is finished. You will be getting the last batch of galleys next week. You can't ask me to put any more." But I was not in the mood to be an obedient little author. "Shut up and don't argue," I said decisively, pulling the dust sheet off the sofa. Vera beamed, for she was always delighted when I refused to be bullied. Arthur and Leslie looked at each other, looked at me, and silently agreed that it was not the right moment to argue. Richard, who as usual was with me, wagged his tail and took up his position beside me. Even Vera's shorthand was tried high, for in rapid bursts I dictated in about an hour the whole of the 42 assessors. "Splendid stuff," said Arthur enthusiastically. "It has got to go in. Vera, how long will it take you to copy that out in longhand so that I can read it to Morrison and Gibb over the telephone?" She glanced at her watch. "I can have it ready for you by 5, plus however long it takes Joan to decide where she wants the paragraphs and the punctuation." I rang up Hartwood to say that we would not be back until after dinner, and Arthur made a preliminary trunk call to warn the printers to have a shorthand expert standing by when he rang them again. As soon as he got through to Edinburgh for the second time, he began to dictate. "To be inset at the end of episode 7, part 8 of Winged Pharaoh. Got that? Tell me if I go too fast. Paragraph. Upon the same scroll shall be recorded the weighing, capital W, of the heart, capital H, by the 42 assessors, capital F, capital A of the dead, capital D, period." He went on for a long time. "It will make an impressive item on our telephone bill," said Leslie feelingly. Then he smiled at me. "But it is well worth it." Have a lovely Saturday.